All right. So, if you thought that Humanities 201 was going to be boring, well, Rome might be kind of boring. But Gilgamesh, welcome to Mesopotamia because I'm going to introduce you to the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it is everything that I can offer you. This is a great, amazing story, and I'm going to go ahead and narrate it for you. Now, if you're interested in the actual full text, you can actually find this online. I'll leave a link in our Blackboard there. You can read through the entire full text of this epic story. There's a little bit of backstory that you should know about it first. So, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero, Gilgamesh, this is a story that was written down using cuneiform, those clay tablets with little sticks. What's interesting is this is the very first superhero story, if you want to think about it that way. He is a kind of demigod. He's both a god and a human, and this is a really crazy, amazing story. Now, there were many sub stories of Gilgamesh. So imagine if you're into Spider Man, there's lots of different tangents of Spider Man. One story where he fights Venom, one story where he fights Carnage, one where he fights the Green Goblin. You get the idea. Gilgamesh is very much the same. These are oral traditions, these would be stories of an epic hero told around a campfire that were eventually put to clay in this cuneiform writing style. Now, over the years, this is many thousands of years, over the years, many of these stories have been just lost to time. We will never know the full breadth of the Epic of Gilgamesh. But there are three individual story arcs that I want to focus on today. So I'm going to tell you the tale of Gilgamesh. You'll notice there are a couple little chunks where I kind of am jumping over parts of the story, and that's just to make things kind of flow and move carefully. So, we're going to go ahead and jump in. So just sit back, relax, pretend you're back in elementary school and we're having story time. And let's go ahead and jump on into the Epic of Gilgamesh. So, Gilgamesh, that is a name, that is a mouthful. Gilgamesh is the king of a city called Uruk. The city of Uruk is found inside the city of Sumer, and we talked about Sumer before. The city of Uruk and the city of Sumer are both real life cities. Gilgamesh is a fictional character. Inside the city of Uruk, run by the king Gilgamesh, this king is kind of horrible. He's unfair. He rapes his own citizens. Yeah, that's hard to get behind a hero that starts out that way. It is said in the story that his mother was a goddess and his father was a human. The story also goes on to specify that he is one third human and two-thirds god. I don't know exactly how that math works out, why he wouldn't be half and half, but take it on it's his word. Gilgamesh is more god than he is human. Okay. Now, inside the ancient city of Sumer is the town of Uruk, and Uruk is a pretty good city. If Sumer is New York City, then Uruk is kind of like New Jersey. I don't know. All right, so Gilgamesh, extremely unfair ruler. He steals, he beats up his own citizens. People live in fear of Gilgamesh. Sounds a lot like Sargon the Great. His citizens cry out to the gods. They say, "Why have you besmirched us? Why have you given us this horrible king? Please, gods, help us." And remember, during this time period, you didn't talk to the gods. The gods were bigger than you, they were better than you. But the citizens were so bad off that they decided to cry out to the sky and they said, "Please help us." So the gods took pity upon these small, little, tiny humans in the city of Uruk, and they created a new human instantly, just like that. They created a new creature, and his name was Enkidu. So now we have two characters. We have Gilgamesh, and we have Enkidu. Now, Enkidu is both man and beast. Whereas Gilgamesh is a god and a human, Enkidu is a wild man. You can see in the picture on the illustration there on the right hand side, he has horns coming out of his head like a buffalo or a bull. He's got the legs of a wild animal. He's got the strength of wilderness by his back. Now, he is equal in strength to Gilgamesh. He is also in harmony with nature. So imagine like the most buffed out dude in the world, but he also happens to be like a super hippie. Okay, that's Enkidu. Now, he's going to begin by entering into a town. Basically, his introduction, the gods create him, drop him into the wilderness, and he kind of fends for himself. He lives amongst the birds and the bees for a while. A local farmer comes across Enkidu and sees him and says, "Oh, you look human-ish. You should go to the main city over in Uruk. That's the place to be." So Enkidu does. He shows up in the main town of Uruk, and he meets up with Shamat. Shamat is the local town prostitute. Now, I know it's the 21st century. The very first thing this guy does is go and seek out a town prostitute. It sounds a little gross, but go with the story. There's a moral here, I promise. So Enkidu eventually shows up and hangs out with the town prostitute, and she is very much in the know. So she quickly introduces him to all the ways that it means to be a human, both in the weird, gross ways, but also just showing him the city. Now, whenever he decides to leave the city after spending a couple crazy nights there, nature actually rejects him. The towns that it kind of has his funk all over him, right? He smells like a human now. Nature, the deers and the sheep and all these grazing animals, they don't want to be around him anymore. He is no longer an animal. He has joined the city. He has become a human. A quote from the story is, "For 7 days, Enkidu, in his wonder, lay in her pleasure." That's Shamat. "And then at last went to seek out the company of the creatures whose hearts delight in feeding upon the grasslands, and visiting the watering places and raging the hills. But seeing him, they fled. The creatures were gone, and everything was changed. His body that loved to range the hills was now unable to follow. But in the mind of the wild man there was a beginning a new understanding. Bewildered, he turned and sought out the company of the temple prostitute." So, think of the temple prostitute as kind of a liaison. She's the welcoming committee. I know, kind of gross in the 21st century sense, but in essence, what's happening here is we have Enkidu. He's a wild man, right? He comes into the main city. He becomes a man in the air quote kind of gross version. He becomes a man, and then nature no longer wants him, and he must join with human society. Now imagine how what that really is saying. If you were a small child sitting around a campfire and I'm telling you this story, think about a little kid. If you have any younger siblings or nephew or someone, kids are crazy. They're wild creatures, right? But eventually they become men and women, and they have to join society. You can't be a full-grown human in today's day and age and still run around playing with toys and stuff. You have to join society. So really, this small little nugget of the Gilgamesh story dealing with Enkidu is kind of a small little allegory for growing up, right? Okay, let's keep going. So, what ends up happening is Enkidu, kind of depressed, right? His homeland just abandoned him. He starts walking through the city of Uruk. And he hears some screams coming from down in the center of town. So he quickly sprints off down the way to try and help whoever is in distress. Again, remember, Enkidu is strong, but he's very peaceful. As he comes around the bend, he sees the king, Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh is there, and he is basically disrupting a wedding party that's happening. So the king of the town is meeting up with some people that are having a party. They're having a wedding ceremony. But in this town, Gilgamesh, the king, basically gets prima nocta. He gets first dibs on the bride to be. It's not a great system. So he goes to basically attack and assault the bride to be, Gilgamesh does, and Enkidu jumps in and stops it. Right? Enkidu is kind of the hero here. So he goes to battle Gilgamesh and take over and say, Gilgamesh, you cannot do this. This is horrible. And they get into a big fist fight. Now, when I'm saying big fist fight, understand we're talking like Avengers level battle here. Okay? These guys are picking each other up and throwing each other through buildings. There's destruction everywhere. Okay? Now, this is a massive, epic level fight. Now they're going to fight back and forth, completely clashing and destroying. The townspeople are hiding, but at the end, they become best friends. Basically, Gilgamesh barely wins the last fight, and Gilgamesh realizes that he is nearly bested, and anyone that is willing to be that strong and that powerful must be his best friend. So from here on out, Gilgamesh and Enkidu are no longer combatants; they're now best friends for the rest of their journey. Okay, I know it's weird. How many times have you made friends where you started off fist fighting? But take it on its note there. Gilgamesh and Enkidu, best friends for the rest of their lives. All right, now part two of the story. So this would be kind of your era of trials. If you know anything about Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces, then you understand that there are different types of stories as you go throughout the hero's journey. So this is the period where we introduce the trials. So Gilgamesh and Enkidu are now best buddies. They're also the strongest forces on the entire planet. So what do? Well, they start going around and basically messing up the place. They hear that there is a evil deity that lives out in the wilderness, and they're going to go into the woods and they're going to cut down the tallest tree they can to see if they can stir up the gods and find this evil demon. The demon's name is Umbaba. So they go out into the wilderness. They find the tallest tree. They cut down this tree, and this angers the woodland spirits. And out comes this massive beast named Umbaba. The quote from the story reads, Umbaba's mouth is fire, his roar is floodwater, his breath is death. Enlil, another god, made him guardian of the cedar forest, to frighten off the mortal who would venture there. But who would venture there? Umbaba's mouth is fire, his roar is floodwater, he breathes and there is death. He hears the slightest sound somewhere in the forest. Enlil made him the terrifying guardian, whose mouth is fire, whose roar is the floodwater. Now, I realize that was kind of repetitive, but think for a second why it was repetitive. So, this actual text comes from those clay tablets. It's been translated over the years. If you think about it this way, what aspect of your life, when have you taken the time to hear something that is very repetitive? It almost has kind of a beat, right? That's because this story would not have been read. This story would have been sung, literally. If you sat around the campfire in ancient Mesopotamia, I would have a drum and I'd be beating out the music as I read this story to you, right? It has kind of a spoken word kind of poetry to it, right? Umbaba's mouth is fire, his roar is floodwater, right? It's got a beat to it. It kind of gets the people going. So what ends up happening? Well, we have our two heroes, Enkidu and Gilgamesh, and they get into a big fight against Umbaba, and they eventually decapitate him. They literally cut his head off. They put his head on top of a stick, they parade it through the city streets, and they say, Look, we have killed one of the evil gods that used to scare us. And again, this is an allegory, this is a story saying that humans, even though these are godly humans, right? These humans are slowly starting to expand their territory and take down the unknown, take down these mystical spirits, right? They're expanding. Okay. So they parade through the city streets, and all of a sudden we introduce a goddess named Ishtar. As they're parading through the city streets, the sky begins to open up, clouds begin to form and bubble above each other, right? And then we introduce here on the right Ishtar. Now, Ishtar is the most beautiful goddess that has ever been. She's also part bird, so I don't know, take that or leave it. So, Ishtar comes along and she is formed out of nothingness. She kind of materializes in front of our heroes. Lightning begins to strike, and poof, there she is. Now, she is absolutely stunning, even though she has bird wings and bird feet. She's absolutely stunning. Now, Gilgamesh, he's hanging out with his best buddy, and Ishtar says to Gilgamesh, she says, Gilgamesh, I have seen your trials. I have seen you take down Umbaba, the fire god, and I'm really impressed. So, I will allow you to be my husband. Now, if a goddess came to you and said that she allows you to be her husband, that's a pretty big honor. But Gilgamesh, I mean, he's hanging out with his bro, he's hanging out. So he looks up to Ishtar, the most beautiful goddess of all times, and this is what he said. This is an actual translation. What could I offer the queen of love in return, who lacks nothing at all? Balm for the body, the food and drink of the gods, I have nothing to give her who lacks nothing at all. You are the door through which the cold gets in. You are the fire that goes out. You are the pitch that sticks to the hands of the one who carries the bucket. You are the house that falls down. You are the shoe that pinches the foot of the wearer. You are the ill-made wall that buckles when time has gone by, the leaky water skin soaking the water skin carrier. Ooh, do you feel that sick burn? Okay, so understand this is ancient civilizations here, right? But basically what he's telling Ishtar, right, this king is looking at a goddess and saying, look, you are absolutely beautiful, I have nothing to offer you, and furthermore, get out of here, right? He's telling her, absolutely, I'm not interested in you, right? You are the door that lets cold air get in. Ugh, you're the fire that goes out, right? You're not the burning fire of passion. You're an old dead fire, right? You're the shoe that pinches my foot. You are a nuisance. Get out of here. Well, man, that is not going to go over very well. Ishtar is completely irate. She is absolutely out of her mind, upset, and angry. And so she begins to create a magical, mystical demon of her own. She kind of whirls her hands around and swirls up some magic. Again, the clouds begin to part, lightning strikes, and this massive, giant bull is formed in front of these two heroes. This bull of the heavens. And he's kind of one part a giant bull with big horns. He's also one other part celestial. It's like the stars themselves come down and land on the earth. So he's kind of see through and made of stars. And our heroes, without missing a beat, they have just this morning killed Umbaba the demon, right? They don't even miss a beat. They don't even sweat. They say, all right, we can do this too. And so they kind of plant their feet in the ground, they hunker down, and the bull of heaven begins to charge at them with his horns pointing straight down. And our heroes, Umbaba and Gilgamesh, they kind of take one horn each, and Gilgamesh grabs onto a horn, and Umbaba grabs onto the other horn, and they kind of do this little slide action, and they twirl around, and in one foul swoop, they break the neck of the bull of heaven. Literally, just snap it like a twig. Now, man, Ishtar is completely put out, and she disappears. So, very quickly, our heroes are proving their strength and their worth. However, Gilgamesh looks over his shoulder as he's bragging that they just took down two gods in one day. He notices something's wrong. He notices that Enkidu, his best buddy for life, hasn't stood back up. In fact, whenever the bull of heaven charged at them, it actually pierced right through the guts of Enkidu. His blood is rolling down. He's slowly beginning to fade away. Gilgamesh runs over and cradles his best friend's body, and he cries out, Enkidu! Your mother is a gazelle, and your father, who created you, is a wild ass. All right, so just for a pause for a second, it's a really big compliment to Enkidu. Remember that he is a wild man, right? So his mother literally is a gazelle. Probably don't tell a date that. Her family's not going to take it too well if you say that her mother's a gazelle. It's not going to go over well. So he says, Enkidu, your mother is a gazelle, and your father who created you is a wild ass. You were raised by creatures with tails and by animals of the wilderness, with all of its breath. The paths going up, to, and down from the forest of the cedars will all mourn you. The weeping does not end day or night. Pretty powerful. This guy has turned away a goddess, has killed two deities, attempted to foil a wedding earlier that day, and he made best friends with this guy, and now his best friend is dead. It's a really sad down note. But again, there's a moral here, right? It proves that you have to cherish what you have, right? Any point in time, your family members, your friends, they could be lost. And so this kind of humanizes Gilgamesh. Remember that he started the story as this horrible leader, and all of a sudden he's lost something. Maybe not his strength, maybe not his resolve, but he realizes that he is not in control of everything. So, we enter into the third part of the story. Now, the third part of the story is going to sound weirdly familiar to many of you. So, Gilgamesh is not the first story ever told by humans. It's the first epic story. He's the first hero. But there have been lots of stories told by humans. One such story involved an old man and his wife. And the old man was told by the gods that there was going to be a massive flood and that he should build a boat. And he should put one of every creature onto this boat so that those creatures could survive, because this flood that was coming was going to kill every other thing on the planet. And you might know that main character as his name is Uptanetsam. Yeah, that's actually his name. It's right there. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly. There it is. So, yeah, it sounds a whole lot like Noah, right? Well, what's interesting is this great flood, this story of the great flood, is in many cultures, and it is long before, like we're talking thousands of years before Noah was even a name. So, Gilgamesh heard the tales of this character and the Great Flood, and he realized that if this guy and his wife are still alive, that they probably know the way to have immortality, and he really wants to bring his friend Enkidu back to life. So if he can find them, maybe he can gain the power of immortality. So he goes off on an adventure. He eventually finds a boat and he sails that boat down the many rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates. And eventually he comes across a small little tiny island. When he gets there, he meets our main heroes here. He meets Upitsinatsum, and they tell him about the Great Flood, and they tell him how the gods made them immortal. And Gilgamesh asks them for the secret of immortality. He also asks them to return with him to the city in Sumer. And these two kindly old little couple here, they reject Gilgamesh. They say that we're not interested in coming back with you. We've been alive for many generations. We don't really want to join humanity again. We're happy to live on our own. However, we will give you the gift of immortality, but you have to prove yourself first. So, Gilgamesh goes through a series of different trials, one showing strength, one showing intelligence and resolve. And he goes through, and the very last test is that Gilgamesh has to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. Unfortunately, on the very last night, Gilgamesh falls asleep. So, when he finally wakes up, when he finally wakes up, he realizes that everybody's gone. Everybody has left him. However, in a slight little upturn, he also has heard word that there is a plant that causes immortality as well. So he's missed out on his opportunity. However, there might be a way to kind of shortcut it. So he eventually learns about this legend that there's a plant at the bottom of the ocean that gives immortality. So he dives into the ocean, swims to the very, very bottom, and there at the bottom is this golden, greenish looking plant. And he scoops one up and he puts it into his little book bag, swims to the top of the ocean there, and he realizes that he now holds the power of immortality. Now he could eat it himself, or he could give it to Enkidu, but he's really excited. So he kind of dries himself off, and he begins his journey back to his hometown of Uruk. As he is slowly closing in on his hometown of Uruk, he sees a small watering hole and he decides to take a little dip. He goes for a swim. He's very hot. He's been walking through the desert, and as he dives into this lake to kind of cool off, he of course strips down. He leaves his clothes and his little knapsack, his backpack holding this plant. He leaves it on the edge of the banks of the river. Well, out of the corner of his eye, he sees a small snake moving along his path. And that small snake moves over, avoids him, but moves over and crawls itself into his backpack. And when it gets there, it eats the plant before Gilgamesh has a chance to get out of the lake and shoo it away. Well, Gilgamesh is now completely upset. He has lost this journey. He has lost this quest. The plant of immortality is gone, and it was eaten by a petty snake. As that snake begins to slither away, that snake is reborn because now it's immortal, and it sheds its old skin, which, no surprise, is an allegory for explaining why the heck snakes shed their skin. A little bit weak on that one, but still. So, the snake slithers away. Gilgamesh is really bummed out, so he hops into a boat and he slowly makes his way back towards the city of Uruk. He is really depressed. He's really sad. He is not the victor here. He's not the hero that he wants to be. But as he begins to return to his city, he begins to speak with the boatman, the person steering the boat. He begins to speak to the boatman and he says, "And so they traveled until they reached Uruk. There Gilgamesh, the king, said to the boatman, 'Study the brickwork, study the fortification, climb the ancient staircase to the terrace, study how it's made. From the terrace see the planted and fallow fields, the ponds and orchards. 1 league is the inner city, another league is the orchards, still another the fields beyond. Over there is the precinct of the temple, 3 leagues, and the temple precinct of Ishtar. Measure Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh.'" So, just as a side note, a league is a form of measurement. But basically, what he's saying to the boatman is, I have failed my mission. I was the worst king in all of human history, but I've been through so many trials, so many tribulations, that I realize finally the city of Uruk is not my city. I, the king, Gilgamesh, I am the city. The people are me. We are one. I must be the best king I possibly can be. So this is how the the epic tale of Gilgamesh comes to an end, is with our hero, who began as the worst king in human history, all of a sudden realizes that he must turn his ways around and be the best king he can because he is the city of Uruk. I hope you enjoyed our little story time there. I've got plenty more tales of other cultures and their myths to come at you. This is going to wrap up our Mesopotamia chapter, and then we're going to go ahead and switch over to chapter 2, dealing with ancient Egypt. We'll see you guys soon. Bye.